Part 2. In this part, we're going to talk about the problem that our species collectively faces. George Orwell said that if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. And that may be exactly what I'll be getting into in this section. Things that are uncomfortable for us to hear. Philosopher Vernon Howard said that human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. Soren Kierkegaard said, there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true. And it all really boils down to that right there. We suffer because we either believe in concepts and ideologies that simply aren't true and do not serve us, or we refuse to believe in that which is true, and therefore we suffer. Those are the two main reasons why all people suffer. The questions for this entire section of Part 2 are the following. What is the nature of this problem that we collectively face? Who or what is creating this problem? How is this problem manifested in the world? Is there an underlying agenda? And if so, what is it? So we'll be taking these in order, and I'll be spending the majority of the time in this section talking about how the problem is manifested, the actual methodologies that are used against us, and talk about what the problem is first. So this is, in one sentence, the main problem that humanity collectively faces. A small cabal of evil sorcerers control our whole planet by manipulating the consciousness of its people into a vibration of fear. We talked about what sorcery and magic were in Part 1. Sorcerers use illusion and manipulation against people to try to create opposition within the self and opposition in the world and chaos. So there's a group of these people who understand how consciousness works, and they're using that knowledge against the bulk of humanity to control their consciousness by controlling the mind, and they're manipulating their consciousness into a vibrational energy of fear. With that, only chaos and evil can be created outwardly into the world. So that's the root problem that we all face. That's what's actually occurring here. That's what we're falling victim to. Many have seen this image, the pyramid of manipulation, the hierarchical and compartmentalized structure through which those in the know, those who have the knowledge of how human consciousness works and are using it as a weapon against the masses, how they run this top-down pyramid scheme. Up here you see the top of the pyramid, the pinnacle, the summit, where the knowledge is at. Those in the know, those with the knowledge, those who are illuminated into this knowledge of consciousness, can be seen at being at the summit or at the top of a pyramid, and then all different aspects of society are controlled from the top down through a hierarchical, regimented, compartmentalized system. Those who are down here have very little knowledge of how things really work and how they're really structured. They just go along to get along. They do their job. They don't really consider the wider implications of what they're involved in or what they do. And yet, they're being used as pawns in a game, in a manipulation game, to actually create more and more compartmentalized and centralized control of everything and everyone. And you could look at this as simply a structure of knowledge. Knowledge is concentrated at higher and higher levels as you get closer to the top of this pyramid, and there is very little knowledge about how things really work down here. These are just puppets whose strings are being pulled to accomplish the goals and the agenda of those at higher levels of knowledge. These sorcerers of consciousness, as I'll call them, are occult practitioners. They use the knowledge and methodologies of occultism to accomplish their agenda. Now, the word occult is very misunderstood. I want to make it very clear that I am not speaking out against or condemning all types of occultism. Occultism is a body of knowledge that is not generally understood or known about. It is simply knowledge. It's a tool to be used by the practitioner. And what we need to understand is just because it's occult does not mean that it is evil. It is simply information about how consciousness works, about how we work. And it is known by some and not known by others. So as a tool, you could look at it like any other tool. For example, a hammer. You would not consider a hammer as good or evil. A hammer simply is a hammer. It is a tool. It is what the wielder of the tool does with it that makes it good or evil, that makes it being used for good or evil. So I could take a hammer and I could go out onto the street and strike the first person, bystander, on the street that I see and kill them, which would be a completely sadistic, evil act. That doesn't make the hammer evil. That makes my intent for wielding the hammer evil. I could take that same hammer and go and use it to build a shelter for a homeless individual, and I would have put an act of goodness forward into the world. So it isn't the tool itself, that's good or evil. It's the consciousness of the individual that is wielding the tool. And that's what the occult is. It is simply a tool. It is a body of knowledge. And when we get into the word, you look at the word occult, it comes from the same root as the word ocular, meaning related to the eye or related to vision. And that is exactly what the word occult means. The word occult simply means hidden. That which is hidden from sight, hidden from everyday availability or sight. We cannot perceive it because it is cloaked, it is veiled. That is what occult is. All occultism simply means hidden knowledge. Researcher Judith Moriarty made this statement: the greatest conspiracies are not actually hidden. They are just fragmented into different pieces like a puzzle right before our eyes. So this conspiracy that I'll be talking about, this global hegemony of control, this global manipulation scheme, is right in our face and we can't see it, most of us. It is just beyond the limits of ordinary perception because it is occult knowledge that most people have very little, if any, awareness of. So it's fragmented into different pieces, but it's right in front of us in plain sight, hidden in plain sight, so to speak. Woodrow Wilson described this manipulation. He said that we have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by the conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. And you would think that an individual like this would understand how the government had come to be structured. This section I'm just going to lay out. I'm not going to go into great detail about how all of these groups are interconnected and related and their histories, because that information is there to be gleaned from a number of researchers who have done intricate, detailed work, made a life's work of understanding these groups and their connections. I'm simply going to lay out an overarching idea of who the hidden occult controllers of this planet are, and give you a general idea of the types of organizations that they work through. So any organization that is globalist in nature, that is working toward a world government, toward greater centralization of power, think tanks that are interconnected and working toward common worldwide goals and worldwide laws. I simply refer to these organizations as globalists because that's what, in fact, they are. Organizations like the United Nations, the G8, G10 family of nations. You have the roundtable think tanks, such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Club of Rome, and many others. And the bottom right there you see a collage of different members of an organization known as the Project for the New American Century. These are globalist think tank organizations that are working toward greater power in fewer hands. That's the main thing to keep in mind. Centralization of power and organizations working toward that aim. World politicians are simply puppets for these greater organizations that are trying to centralize power more and more. If they're on a scene level, they are probably not very high up in the hierarchy. They are controlled, and they are simply performing their tasks as they are laid out by their masters, by those who really are pulling the strings behind the scenes. But world leaders that are in senior positions of governments are certainly involved in this process of global manipulation. Military leaders, strategists, planners at high levels, very involved in this manipulation. Much higher up in this hierarchy and organizational structure are globalist bankers, such as the Rothschild banking dynasty, the Rockefellers, and many other financial institutions that are really calling the shots behind what we see playing out at governmental levels throughout the world. Royal family members of all nations, the royalty of England, Spain, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries. So royalty is not simply figurehead. It is involved in these organizations. It does direct the agendas of these organizations, and it does have intricate interconnections with the banking dynasties that are really calling the shots behind what we see playing out at the scene level within governmental structure. Religious and New Age ideology leaders certainly play a role in this to cover the spiritual aspect of the deception. Media moguls that control the information that we are presented with. And again, it's not my intent here to go through all of the interconnectedness between these organizations, nor to present a all-encompassing tapestry of how they work. It's simply to give you an overview that this is the body of individuals, and these are the organizations that they work through. The research is out there and has been compiled by many researchers, and you could look into that for lifetimes if you so chose. Theodore Roosevelt made this statement: behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. Former president making this statement. You would think, again, that someone like this has some knowledge of how things are really structured in the power centers of the world. And he's telling you right there, out in the open, that there is an invisible government that owes no allegiance to the people. Now, the body of knowledge that these sorcerers have available to them, where it is derived from, is what many researchers have called the mystery traditions. The mystery traditions of consciousness. Again, it is not to say that this body of knowledge in and of itself is evil. The sorcerers that are doing this work of manipulation, this great work to hypnotize and enslave humanity, they are the inheritors and the perverters of this body of knowledge. It is not theirs, it does not belong to them. They happen to come into contact with it through their, perhaps, bloodlines, their involvements, okay? And they are taking this awareness, this knowledge of how the human consciousness works and how it can be influenced, and they're using it for their own ego-identified worldview and benefit. So they're the inheritors of this knowledge, and they're the perverters of this knowledge. They're using it in a perverted, irresponsible fashion to serve their own egoic will. And this is the ancient secret society networks all throughout the world that have their roots back as far as ancient Egypt and Babylon and even farther back. They have this body of knowledge. They continue in many ways to preserve this body of knowledge. Some of them for a positive purpose, some for a negative purpose. So it isn't any one given secret society that's orchestrating and controlling it all. There are very responsible and good-hearted individuals in these groups, and there are very dark-hearted, manipulating individuals in these groups. It is simply that the body of knowledge about human consciousness, that it's called the mystery traditions because it dates so far into human antiquity, we don't really know when it was codified and came into its existence as we understand it. But it is the knowledge of how human beings operate. You know, our physiology, our emotional makeup, our psychology, etc. How the human psyche works. And that is who is really controlling the whole game from behind the scenes, are the people who have this information, have had it for thousands of years, and are using it in a completely perverted way to manipulate people for their own egoic benefit. So that's clear. That's crucial to keep in mind, and to keep it clear that, again, it is not the knowledge of the mystery traditions or the mystery traditions themselves that is evil. It is how imbalanced consciousnesses are using that knowledge to control people. So this is one of the structures of secret societies. In this case, it happens to be Freemasonry. You see that it is a compartmentalized, pyramidal structure. Okay? It's hierarchical. So it's a top-down scheme. Higher levels of knowledge in fewer people's hands as you get closer to the top, and then as you get down near the bottom, there's many more people that comprise that group, but they're less in the know than those smaller groups at higher levels. So it's simply a process of compartmentalization and the hierarchical structure of knowledge. So you want to get to this level, you have to play the game to get up to this level, and then you're initiated into that knowledge. And it is my contention that this is the entire reason that this knowledge has been perverted in the way that it has. This is not a democratization of knowledge. This is elitism when it comes to knowledge. This isn't giving knowledge out to everyone freely, regardless of who wishes to have it. The total distribution, the egalitarian distribution of knowledge would have assured that this knowledge never became as perverted as it has become. But instead, because there is this hierarchical and compartmentalized structure within the networks that do have the knowledge of the mystery traditions, this is the reason that we have seen such irresponsible use of that knowledge. Researcher Phil Rockstrode described this process this way, and I think it's a great statement. The authoritarianism inherent to this structure, he's talking about the compartmentalized hierarchical structure, the pyramid structure of secret society networks. This authoritarianism inherent to this structure is antithetical to the concept of the rights and liberties of the individual. Most individuals bound by secrecy-prone hierarchical values will, over time, lose the ability to display free thinking, engage in civic discourse, and even be able to envisage the notion of freedom. That's what it is really all about. So you put people into this idea that there is always someone beneath you and always someone above you, and the idea of freedom slowly goes out the door with that regimented, compartmentalized, and hierarchical worldview. And that is why, very much like this pyramid of manipulation diagram, secret societies have also fallen into that way of looking at the world, and power being concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and that knowledge being used ultimately in an irresponsible way by those who have it. So I'm going to talk about two groups of people. I'm going to talk about the people at the bottom of this pyramid and the people at the top, but not so much those at the top. There's a level even above the top of that pyramid, which I'll briefly talk about. But I want to talk about the people at the bottom of this pyramid, those who really aren't in the know, those who really are suppressed by this manipulation that's at work. And the group that I perceive as being the most suppressed, the most damaged by this level of manipulation that is taking place. You would think it's just your average citizen, your average person, but it really isn't. There is a group that is even more manipulated, that is even more held in deep levels of unconsciousness and fear, and in being cut off from their true divine nature, being cut off from the ever-present and ever-flowing dynamic energy of consciousness and love. And these are the people who I would consider at the very, very bottom of this pyramid with the most weight pressing upon them. And it is the controllers of the world, the military and the police. These are the people who are the most victimized by this hierarchical structure of manipulation. Sadly, they're often the people who understand how this dynamic is at work in the world more than anybody else. They don't understand it more so than anyone else because their consciousness is in that shutdown of a mode. And because they're so ruled by the reptilian complex of the brain that they're in that fear vibration, they're in that confusion vibration, and they're just being given orders, they're just following orders to go out and control things in the external world because they've bought the big lie, and they've bought the lie that says that control is the answer, that you can create order from control. And we've already looked at that in part one. It's like trying to dry wet clothes by pouring more water on them, or trying to put out a fire by pouring more gasoline on it. You will never create the opposite polarity by adding the same polarity to the situation. So you can never create order by adding fear, confusion, and control to the mix. You can only create order by adding the love dynamic, love, dominion, or non-duality, and freedom is how order is created. I can't emphasize that enough. These are the people that are actually the most damaged by this system and the most manipulated. They actually have the brunt of the weight of the system upon them more than anyone else. And as such, they need the greatest amount of help and the greatest amount of emotional support and understanding in getting to a higher level of consciousness, which will be exceedingly difficult for these individuals, particularly if they do not wish to come out of their worldview, their negative worldview that is based on separation and control, and they have great attachment to being right, to that the world is the way they currently think that it is, even though it bears very little resemblance to reality in any way. It's quite unfortunate. So they actually need our help more than anybody else. Now, back to the top of the pyramid, those who are really in the know, really calling the shots. Is there something even higher than that? And I'm really here today to tell you that, yes, there is, and I'm kind of uninterested in what really controls the game from even higher than the top level of the pyramid, because in either event, it's the same way that they accomplish it, and it will be undone in the same way, through a rising of awareness and consciousness. I'm here to tell you that the highest level of this pyramid is not the summit. There's always a hidden chamber built into any great pyramid. And the hidden chamber is where the shots of the game are really called from. Okay? And it is now known that there is one sorcerer that sits in the middle chamber, in the hidden chamber of this pyramid of manipulation. And this one sorcerer alone calls the entire shots of the entire game. They're holding all the keys to all the locks on all the doors. And there's a device now that you can look into, and you can discover who that one hidden manipulator, hidden sorcerer, hidden prison warden, if you will, is. And there's only one. And the device that has been built that enables one to look into it and find out who that hidden controller really is right here. It's a common, everyday mirror, because that is who controls the entire game. The individual, the person that stares back from that looking glass, is who has all the keys to all the locks on all the doors, and it's all about what is going on within. That's what's really controlling the game. Every individual is their own prison warder. See, we ultimately create our own manipulation, our own enslavement, our own domination. So it is up to us to individually raise our consciousness, our understanding of what is taking place, to break out of that prison, break out of that shell of shut down consciousness, to understand what's really going on here. And of course, if we look at the levels of consciousness as they manifest in the physical world, we understand that there's one way that manipulators, people who are attempting to manipulate consciousness so that they come out on top and other people suffer as a result, they have to attack really one aspect of the individual. And it's ultimately all about mind control. Because if we look at this structure, spirit, mind, and body, this level is the physical world level. Above that, linked with it, is the mind. And above that is spirit, is all-encompassing pure being, pure consciousness. If you're going to have a true connection in your physical manifestation to the spirit, that connection is this layer, the mind layer. Okay? So if the mind is in good health, if the mind is in balance, if the mind is not under manipulation and control, there will be a powerful connection between body and spirit. If it is not in good state, if it is in disarray, if you do not understand the nature of the mind and the nature of your own psyche and psychological makeup, then it is very easy to sever this connection between body and spirit once the mind is under control, externally controlled. So you look at it this way. The body could be seen as the male principle, the blade, or the yang energy. Conversely, the spirit is the opposite aspect, the opposite essence. It is that which is not physical. It's the yin, or the feminine aspect. See, the body rises up to meet the spirit, and the spirit descends to meet the body. So they meet at this realm. This is where body and spirit meet, and they mingle in the realm of mind. So the blade and the chalice combined could be seen to represent mind, and it's a symbol that we've all seen. It's the Star of David, or the Seal of Solomon, as it has been called. It's the seal of body and spirit coming together at the layer of mind. And it is the solar energy combined with the lunar energy to create Sol and Mon, sun and moon, the seal of Solomon. So keep in mind, that is the whole dynamic that sorcerers are after. They want to control this level. So this level would be very difficult to control physically. You would need a lot of physical force to get it done. You control this level, people will police themselves. They will mind control themselves, essentially, through public opinion and through indoctrination down to generation upon generation. The control that they're after is in this level, and if they control the mind, they de-link the body from the spirit. And that's the whole game that they're after. That's the whole thing that they want to perpetrate. Mind. So this whole next section of the presentation is going to be about methodologies of mind control, consciousness control, how to control what you think, how you feel, and how you act. Okay? The methods of manipulation that are employed against us, members of the human species, by people who have this occultic knowledge and use it for their own egoic benefit. I call this the methods of manipulation, and as many researchers have called it, particularly Michael Tessarian has termed this the war on you, because it's the only real war that's being waged out there. There isn't a war on poverty, there isn't a war on homelessness, there isn't a war on ignorance, there isn't really a war on terrorism. There is only a war on you and your consciousness. That's what the real war that's being waged on earth is really being waged upon. It's the war on your consciousness, on your mind. So we're going to look at the methods of manipulation. And they're very varied in their attack pattern. They're very, it's multi-tiered. Okay? It's very spread out and throughout all different areas of life, these methods of manipulation. So it's a multi-tiered attack on our consciousness. And I've chosen 14 of what I consider the most prominent methods of manipulation to go through in the presentation. And I've chosen 14 as a symbolic number, which we'll get into later and you'll understand why. But here's what the methods of manipulation are that are used against us. Obfuscation, worldview poisoning, the exploitation of primal fears, the divide and conquer technique, indoctrination through what we call the education system, controlled opposition, the financial system, the monetary system, the control of mass media and information, food and medicine, in quotes, the illusion of time, the denial, hassle, ridicule factor, what I coined the DHR factor, religion, specifically religion as binding, which we will get into, the use of symbolism in a mentally subversive way, in a mentally subversive fashion, and what I call chaos sorcery, what other researchers have called the problem, reaction, solution method, or the Hegelian dialectic. So I'll be taking the first 11 of them up to the DHR factor. It will be a small analysis of each one. But then for the last three, religion, symbolism, and chaos sorcery, I consider those the real heavy guns of the war, so to speak. They're the real weapons, the big three of the weapons. And I'll be taking those at length. I'll be going through those specifically. So that will take up the bulk of part 2. So I'll begin with obfuscation. This is the first method of manipulation that the mind control sorcerers use against the human population. So obfuscation kind of looks like this. You see an elaborate, ornate mask here. If you saw that coming at you, you might not be so worried about it. It seems like an ornamental style. This is how something has to be packaged to us. It has to look ornate. It has to look pretty. It has to be packaged and presented to us in a nice way. But if we really saw what lays underneath, if we really saw what was truly coming at us, which is this, we would want to go in the opposite direction. So see, it always has to wear a mask. It has to be sold to us as something other than what it really is, so that people think it's something else. That's what obfuscation really is. And I'm going to just briefly go over what are the things that are obfuscated. How do they use obfuscation to control us mentally? Well, the sorcerers want to obfuscate simplicity with complexity. In fact, everything that I'll talk about in this presentation is quite simple, taken in and of itself. The tapestry may be ornate and may be a lot of information to take in, but each individual component is simple, and that is because the truth is always simple. It's always easy to understand truth. Truth never comes at us with great levels of complexity. It's always something simple and elegant, just like we find in nature. So if a controller can get you to think that discovering the truth is way too complex for you to ever look into it, they'll push you off the path because you'll say, I'm not even going to bother. It's too complex. I wouldn't possibly be able to understand it, so I'm not even going to bother to try. Okay, so that's obfuscation of simplicity with complexity. Controllers obfuscate principles with laws. Principles are based in conscience of doing the right thing because one has consciously recognized it as the right thing. Law is that which strives to create obedience based on a dynamic of fear of punishment. You're codifying something and saying you must conform to this, you must comply to this, not because you have recognized it as such, as being true and as being the right thing to do, but because in fact you will be punished by someone if you do not conform to this or comply to it. And that modality of consciousness is based in fear. Law is based ultimately in fear consciousness, whereas principles are based in the recognition of truth and having conscience be born within an individual. And as such, that consciousness is based in love, embodied in a man like Gandhi, a man of principle. So the next thing that they obfuscate is dominion with fear of punishment. So this is a person who rules the kingdom of the self. They've activated the energy within them. They have united the male and female polarities, the yin and the yang, and they have raised their consciousness to a vibration of the solar mind, to the love energy dwelling within them. And they don't take actions because they fear the punishment if they don't do or do not take a certain action. They take an action because they themselves understand and have recognized that that action exists in harmony with natural law, with the natural order of the universe, with the truth. It resonates in truth. And that individual has made that recognition according to their own will and their own consciousness, not because they fear punishment. Taking an action or not taking an action because you fear punishment is the lowest level of consciousness that you can take or not take any action. You're taking it out of a vibratory energy of fear as opposed to a level of understanding that is born in love and conscience and consciousness. So you cannot take an action based on fear of punishment and expect there to be order and peace and good things in the world. We have to make these recognitions through the raising of our own awareness that they resonate with truth and take action according to those principles. The next thing that they obfuscate is gnosis with belief. See, gnosis can be defined as an understanding that is born through direct experience of a thing. So gnosis means you don't believe that it exists. You know that it does because you have a direct experience of that thing. So you could put your hand in a pot of water and it's hot, and then you have gnosis that it's hot because you actually placed your hand in the pot and you know that it is hot. Someone else, if you said, okay, that's hot, they may believe you, they may have a belief about that, they don't really have gnosis of it until they directly access it or directly experience it. So that's what gnosis is. Gnosis is knowledge born of direct experience. Belief, which is what religions want you to have. They want you to simply believe something because it is told to you by someone that came before you, will put you into a modality of consciousness where you're not really thinking your own thoughts. You haven't really thought through why it is you may hold a particular belief or value. It is just something that you have acquired from someone else's understanding of the world. And that's why I say throughout this presentation, no one should believe anything that I'm saying throughout this whole presentation. It should resonate with you as truth because you looked into these things on your own and determined that they are true or not true. And then live your life in harmony and according to your understanding of that. Not because you believe what I'm saying. I'm not asking for anyone's belief. If I was asking for anyone's belief, I would be no better than any other religious leader. So I'm looking to inspire gnosis within a person. That you look into things on your own and come to your conclusions about them because you yourself have studied and considered them and know how they work. Individuality is obfuscated with culture. And this is a big one because all the value within us is carried in the individual. The individual is of ultimate value. And again, an individual is unique, a unique expression of consciousness. And culture, as the late Terence McKenna, one of my greatest mentors and teachers, said, culture is not your friend, folks. He was very fond of saying, you know, it's that which controls you. It's a cult, so to speak. So culture is trying to make everyone conform to its value system and its ideology about what is true and what is right. And oftentimes that's not really in harmony with the truth, with natural law, with how things really operate in the world. It's simply that way because people who came before us made it that way. And we're just going along with it. We don't know whether it's actually right or getting anything really of great value and something that can lead to our actual fulfillment out of it. We're just going along with it because others before us did it, and we're expected to take up that mantle and do the same thing in culture. So it's a self-perpetuating, institutionalized belief system. It's an institutional paradigm, a way of looking at the world. And that's what they try to tell you your individual identity is. It's a member of culture. Well, that isn't what your individual identity is. The true identity of the self is pure consciousness experiencing itself in a multitude of forms, and that's where the greatest value lies, within the individual, not within a culture. They obfuscate openly truth with lies. This is very simple. They'll just tell you black is white is black, and it's this way because we said so, because we're the arbiters of truth, and we will tell you what is right and what is wrong. We'll make it up as we go along, depending on our objectives and our aims and our goals. So the truth is what we say it is. It's not something that's out there. It's just all relative, moral relativism again. Truth is what I say it is because that's what's good for me. Well, that isn't really what truth is. Truth is actually independent of the individual, and we need to use our perceptions to get into harmony with it. That's the truth actually exists independent of what we think or feel about it. So that's another method of obfuscation, and this is how moral relativism works. Obfuscate the truth with lies. Obfuscate good with evil. Get everybody believing that they can they'll continue to do things that really aren't good for them, but they'll end up getting something good out of it. This is the hamster in wheel syndrome. You know, I'll keep doing this and getting one result, but expect to get another result, which I can never get by doing this, but I'll continue to run around in the wheel anyway. See, they want you to believe that you can get that which is good by really doing things that are harmful ultimately, you know, and are not in harmony with nature, in harmony with natural law, in harmony with the truth. So people are really living this here. They're living that which is going to get them that, and they think it's going to get them this. And it'll never work that way. And that's what attachment is all about. Attachment to doing things one way, thinking a certain way, and you expect that somehow magically, even though it's never gotten you what you want, it's going to suddenly get you what you want one day. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. The next method of manipulation is worldview poisoning, as we talked about a bit in part 1. Worldview poisoning is through constant application of repeating certain phrases, repeating certain concepts, and putting ideas into people's minds, you get people to look at human nature in a certain way, as damaged, as fundamentally flawed. Even upon coming into the world, we're born in an evil state, we're born in a damaged state, in an impure state. And that isn't really what human nature is. We have to see this for what it is, a method of worldview poisoning. We don't come in evil, we are conditioned through those who have come before us and through the bad information that we take in and accept as truth. That's how we become flawed in our ways of looking at the world and of being in the world. This is what human nature really looks like. It is fundamentally good, it is fundamentally nurturing and protecting, and wants to help raise ourselves and other beings to higher levels of awareness. Another way that the worldview is attacked is by getting people to identify their value with a number or a group of possessions. So this has to do with how we view mentally our value as an individual. Do we look at ourselves as how much money we make, how much money we have in the bank, what kind of car we drive, what kind of clothes we wear, what kind of house we live in, you know? Or do we recognize that no value can be placed upon the individual because the individual is of infinite value? And the individual is an expression of infinite consciousness having an experience in the physical world. And if we look at that as our value, then we can't be brainwashed, we can't be mind controlled, because we'll recognize the spiritual nature of ourselves in others that we're around. In other words, that which is divine in me recognizes that which is divine in you, as encapsulated in the phrase namaste, or by the Mayan, in la catch. I am another you, you are another me, because this is our true value. The controllers want people to think, to mentally believe that there is no such thing as change, that there is a static state. It has always been this way, it is this way now, and it will always be this way, and this is simply untrue. This is another method of worldview poisoning, another methodology to control consciousness. I'll often say to people, so much change is occurring, it's almost impossible to keep up with it. And people often respond, nothing's ever going to change, it's always going to be this way. They're a victim of this worldview poisoning, that it is impossible to create change, because they think that change has to be something that happens instantly on a global level. It doesn't work that way. The global change is happening slowly by individuals changing themselves, their own consciousness. We have to change and become the butterfly, and that's how change happens on a global scale. Okay? So change is possible Thousands of people alive today are evidence of this, and it can be done. It often happens in small steps, and it happens by each individual being the change, changing themselves. The next method of manipulation is preying upon our primal subconscious fears that go back to human antiquity. And here's what they are. Our primal fears are fourfold. The fears that are the deepest rooted in the subconscious mind are the fears of darkness, the fears of predators, the fear of abandonment, and the fear of chaos. So the controllers know this, the sorcerers know this, those who are using mind control understand that we are motivated to avoid these fears. So they use them against us all the time. And here's how it works. See, the sun is the greatest friend of mankind. There would be no life without the sun on this planet. Could never exist without the sun. Sun provides energy, light, heat, warmth, food, for plants to grow and other animals to live. So there is no life without the sun. The ancients understood this quite readily, and that is why the sun is revered and worshipped in many ancient religions and cultures. Winter is a time of the sun not being present, so along with that you get the cold, you get die off of plants, you get the scarcity of food, you get animals coming in and encroaching territory, and things becoming a more dangerous place. So you're looking to the father figure, the strong male dominant father figure, for protection of those that aren't as strong and are as physically able to control the surroundings. So when the sun is going down and not present, or is absent for a long time, as in winter, the main source of protection is the male dominant father figure of the tribe or the culture, because he is the one that will protect the tribe, protect the family from these guys, the predators. That ties in with the other primal fear. So you have the fear of darkness tied in with the fear of predators. And if the father figure abandons his people that he is protecting, then they are exposed to the influence of predators. So there is where the fear of abandonment ties in to this story about how these subconscious fears have been working on us since the dawn of mankind, since human antiquities. And when we get into that situation where there may be predators around us, the first thing we're going to cry out for is do something about it. This can't continue to go on. We need to be protected by the big daddy figure, the male dominator father figure, which in our culture has become the governments of the world. Those who we look to for protection, and we are dependent upon, we have become dependent upon, because they have been propped up as the male father figure of our culture to protect us against any threats. When in fact, the joke is really on us. Because a predator, if you break the word down, is simply a predator, one who has come before another. And again, this ties in with the ancient mystery traditions, the ancient secret societies that had the information of consciousness, and these are the people who are ultimately in control now, who are calling the shots from behind the scenes, and they are predators to our level of awareness. They've had this knowledge for thousands of years. They know we don't have it. For them, it's almost as simple as shooting fish in a barrel, because they have all this knowledge about how we work. We have very little knowledge about how we work, and many don't even desire to have it. That's one of the main problems. And they have become the predators, our predators. They're telling us that they're going to prop themselves up as our protectors, but in fact, because of the levels of knowledge they have and how they're using it against us, they're actually our predators, our predators. The next method of manipulation is the technique known as divide and conquer. So I have here an image of Caesar, who used this in the Roman Empire to conquer lands that he absorbed into the Roman Empire. For example, when Caesar was attempting to conquer Gaul, he would have sub-regiments of his army attack certain towns in the region Gaul, which we now call France, to create conflicts between neighboring tribes. He would blame it on, have them blame it on another tribe, and then he would watch the chaos ensue and watch them fight amongst each other. While he was sitting back, his armies had lots of rations, lots of supplies, were well rested. When all the fighting was done and their forces were weakened, he would send his legions in and annihilate the enemy with minimal losses. The divide and conquer strategy. Get people fighting amongst themselves so they do not have any reserves or strength for fighting the real enemy that's keeping them all down. And they divide us on whatever principles they can, whatever ways we can possibly see ourselves as separate. They use the divide and conquer through sex, male and female, through race, any differences in race, region of the world, ethnicity, through age, young and old, through religion. I'm Christian, I'm Islamic, I'm Jewish. Through class, the rich and the poor. Through politics, Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus labor. You look at nationality, the United States versus Mexico, Canada versus the United States, France versus England. You know, any ways that you can get people to see themselves as separate, you're reinforcing this method of manipulation and mind control, because people are easier to control and dominate if they are warring amongst each other. The indoctrination system that we laughingly call education in the Western culture. Western education has become almost entirely left brain. We talked about what the imbalance in the brain does to the brain chemistry and the brain physiology. Our culture is actually a system of indoctrination toward the left brain. Reading, writing, and math. Science. The absence, largely. Most programs that get cut from school are artistic, creative programs, music, things like that. We need a whole-brained education that encapsulates and that encompasses both left and right brain for a holistic approach to balancing both brain hemispheres and having them come together in coherence. And unfortunately, that isn't what we have. We have outcome-based systems of education that are really there to dumb people down, to keep them in a half-brain state of consciousness, to teach them only 5 sense identification, and to prepare them for roles, for ego-identified roles that we call jobs, that are basically preparing people to be. This education system is designed to prepare people to be conforming, obedient workers. That is what they're trying to pump out through the scientifically crafted form of indoctrination in the West that we call education. And what I'll be talking about later is occultic symbology that is used throughout our culture. One of them is the square graduation hat, the board that is worn on top of the crown chakra. This is a highly subversive symbol because the square has always represented base consciousness. The square, in particularly Freemasonic symbology, represents base consciousness or the checkered life of mankind. Those who are wanderers between light and darkness, never really knowing which is which. So they lead the life of a pawn. And it's particularly subversive because it's a black square that represents darkness, ignorance, strife, conflict. The black square, a highly subversive symbol, and they're placing it upon graduation upon the crown chakra, the place where the energy of consciousness is strongest in the physiology. And a highly subversive symbol representing that one has become gradually indoctrinated. They have graduated to the consciousness of the square. It's absolutely amazing that a symbol like this can be put right before people, and they think of it as something that is positive and revel in it. Yet it is actually a very subversive usage of symbolism upon the consciousness. The next method of manipulation is controlled opposition. So this is the illusion of two opposing forces fighting each other when in fact they're actually the same force. It's a flip side of the same coin. Best example of this is Democrat versus Republican. There is no difference between the two. There is only really one political party doing the agenda of the manipulators behind the scenes, the international banking dynasties and the occultic controllers that call the shots. This is a great political cartoon here. The two-party illusion is the first aspect of this controlled opposition. Again, no difference between Republican and Democrat. They're two wings of the same bird. Vote all you want. The flight plan does not change. The body, they're both connected to the same body and they're flying to the same place. And if you need any clearer example of this, look to the 2004 election scam, the election fraud between John Kerry and George Bush, because they're both members of the elite order of the Skull and Bones, Yale fraternal order based on a dark sect of Freemasonry, what I would call a rogue lodge, and it is the order of death. It is that which worships the force that brings chaos, because they are the chaos magicians. They are the chaos sorcerers. They are bred to be these left brain dominant controllers and manipulators that use occultic ideologies against people to manipulate them. And these two men are both orders of members of the same fraternal brotherhood of Yale University, the Skull and Bones. A bit about the symbology of the skull and the bones. The skull is where thought takes place. The bones, the crossbones, are what we use to perform action. But you'll notice that there is a lost mode of consciousness here. There is thought and action, but no emotion. The sacred feminine is removed from the equation because the sorcerers of consciousness are those who use their intelligence and their will to act, but have no emotion. So they are the skull and the bones. They don't care about the consequences of their actions in the external world and what their actions do to others. They're only using their egoic will, the bones, and their cleverness, the left brain consciousness, the left brain aspect of human thought with no connection to the wisdom or the nurturing or the intuition of the right brain to do whatever they want to do their egoic will. The flip side of this controlled opposition is the New Age movement. And this may somewhat upset some people who are into New Age ideologies. I don't think all New Age movement ideologies are bad or negative or shouldn't be looked into. I certainly think they should be looked into. I think meditating in the proper context is a great form of experiencing pure awareness. However, I think that the New Age movement is largely co-opted, and it is being used as something to get people never to look at the negative. To say, don't look at that, that's negative. You're being negative by saying that people are being manipulated. Speak no evil, see no evil, hear no evil. And that ideology isn't going to get you anywhere. That's not going to get you closer to the understanding of why things are the way they are. That's an ostrich with his head in the sand syndrome, as far as I'm concerned. So the New Age movement can imbalance people toward the right brain if they're not careful, and they keep going into these ideologies that says there's no such thing as anything negative. don't look into any of the negative. It really isn't going to get us anywhere in understanding why things are the way that they are and how they got that way. We need to confront the negative, not be totally absorbed by it or to completely get lost in it, but we need to look into it, confront the dark recesses of the psyche and the origins of the human ego and the human attachment to the physical world, to understand why evil has come into manifestation to the extent that it has in our world. If we're really going to solve these problems, we have to go into those levels of the deep, dark recesses of the subconscious and confront the shadow there where it lives, if we're going to come out of it and be reborn in wisdom and understanding. So that is controlled opposition. The next method of manipulation is one of the biggest, and it's one of the hardest to transcend and rise above because of how ingrained the belief in the financial system is in our world. So the financial system is basically a system of enslavement, and it is based on the principles of fiat currency and debt, which we will talk about. One of the originators of the Rothschild banking dynasty, Meyer Rothschild, made this statement: "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." Because he knew that all you really had to do to take control of the direction of a nation is to control how its monetary system works and control the way that the money is printed, the interest rates, to charge interest on it, and to control the amount of money in circulation. And what we have in effect today as our monetary system is a system of fiat currency. Fiat is a Latin word which means so be it, let it be. And this is exactly what our monetary system is. Money is printed at the whim of money printers. They simply say, let it be. The Federal Reserve System, a conglomeration of corporate, privately owned banks that has nothing to do with our system of government. It is wholly privately owned and operated, and it essentially controls our government, our lawmaking body, and our lawmaking decisions in Congress. And this fiat currency system is actually a system of printing money at the whim of the money masters in order to create one thing, and that is debt. Our money system is essentially nothing but debt, because every dollar that is printed carries debt with it. The amount of money in circulation never equals the amount of debt that is owed. So it is a self-perpetuating system of debt that can never be paid off. It just grows larger and larger and larger. Thomas Jefferson warned against this type of a monetary system. He said that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, the banks and corporations that will grow up around the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers occupied. He understood it perfectly. He warned us against this practice of fiat currency and giving too much power and sovereignty to corporate banking institutions. The next method of the financial system is taxation. And taxation is one of the clearest forms of indentured servitude, at least it is to me, than anything else that I've ever looked at. If you're saying to someone, for whatever reason, you must give me this much of what you make, and I will determine how much of that you will give me, I can't understand how anyone can look at that and not understand that that is a form of slavery. You're saying that the product of your labor is not your own. It does not belong to you. It's essentially saying that your physical body that you use to put your labor into effect in the physical world does not belong to you, and it is owned by someone else who can tell you what you will and will not do with your earnings. So this slide should upset a great deal of people, because these 4 months are essentially the months of the year that your average middle-class American works for nothing. All of this money is given to the state. All the money you make on all of these days, January, February, March, and April, are all given to the state through various forms of taxation. Then you're taxed on what you buy as well. But the average citizen, 1/3 of their earnings are given over in taxation. And we actually still think that we are a free people. So manufactured lack is the next example of how we are controlled through the financial system. And third world nations that are controlled by these banking dynasties, they get into these situations not because they don't have the resources to feed and clothe their people. It is because their leaders have gotten into debt contracts with foreign banking institutions, and then when they squander those loans for, they go to countries that they know that they can manipulate their leaders. When those loans are squandered and they really can't pay back the interest or even the principal on those loans, they come in and say, well, we'll forgive some of this debt if you let us use your land for certain things that we want to build and ship out. And they get into shipping, growing cash crops on their land and shipping them out, exporting them to then buy and import goods into their country that really they don't really need from other countries, that they could grow on their own land. And they're exporting their main resources that could be used, those resources could be used to feed and clothe their people. And that's how lack and third world debt actually works. There's many documentaries about this that you could check into, but the world has enough resources to feed and clothe every single living being on this planet, many times over. And the idea that these nations could not feed their own people is ludicrous. The reason that this is happening is because they are extremely put under a hardship of debt to international banking institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. The other aspect of the financial system that really goes to work on our consciousness is that people come to be seen and to see themselves as human resources, not as individuals, but as a resource to be used as the corporate structure wants to use us. To look at human beings as simply a resource is to devalue their individuality and their uniqueness and have people see themselves as a thing, as something that isn't really actually human, as an object. See, they want us to see ourselves as simply worker drones. You're just a drone that can be replaced at any given time, and someone else can step in and do that task. It was described beautifully in the allegorical movie The Matrix by the character Morpheus, who said that humanity has simply been reduced to one of these, a battery, to power the structure of the Matrix, to power the machine world. And that is what we are when we see ourselves and we allow ourselves to be seen as human resources. Ultimately, the financial system boils down to one word: slavery. It is what is used to really chain us and get us to see ourselves as workers, as a worker race of people, and it's used to actually keep us in servitude, to serve interests that really we don't benefit from. We think we do, but in essence we don't. Things continue to go on as they are, benefiting an elite class, a very small elite class, while millions of people go hungry and starve. And there's no reason for it. The financial system is slavery as long as a differential profit motive monetary system is in existence. Human beings will live under slavery. Until we recognize that there are only people and resources on this planet, and we use our power of will to properly distribute the resources to the people as they need them and as we wisely use them. And not in destruction of the earth, looking at the earth as something that we own, but something that we are ourselves a part of, and we use and manage these resources efficiently. Until we do that and get away from a profit motive differential source of seeing money, seeing goods, okay, and services, there will be human slavery. And I will go so far as to say that is exactly as it should be. Everything is now exactly as it should be. Based on our level of consciousness, we are getting what we are creating through our consciousness. This isn't something that is happening to us. That's why I say we are in the hidden chamber of the pyramid controlling the shots. It is up to us, what we put into manifestation through our thoughts, emotions, and actions that determines what happens to us collectively. So if we want to continue to believe in the monetary system and continue to live as if somehow it never has gotten us what we really want. It's always created more suffering and more debt and more enslavement. But we want to believe, we want to stay attached to a belief system that doesn't benefit us. And we want to think we'll continue to do that and somehow it'll just work out okay. We'll suddenly just get something that we've never gotten as a result of doing this. We're going to continue to be enslaved. And again, it should not be any other way. When we change our consciousness, the shackles will come off. The next method of manipulation that is used upon us by the sorcerers of consciousness is the control of our mass media. The information that we get to hear through mainstream channels on any given day, the mass media, companies like CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox News, Time, New York Times, the Washington Post, these are all tightly controlled hierarchical systems of scientifically crafted information dispersal that can be summarized under one word: propaganda. These are propaganda corporate entities. They are pumping out a worldview, a vision of seeing the world, a way of seeing the world that the people who own these entities, which are approximately now 5 companies, want us to perceive the world. So these are the disseminators of the mind control through society to get people to think not for themselves, to not get people to learn how to think, but to tell them what to think. And you'll hear all forms of negativity, all forms of violence, of dog-eat-dog world, of man's hatred of other men, of rioting, of natural disasters, any kind of fear-based mentality that they can pump out into the culture through the media, they will do it, because it is all about keeping people in fear. Fear. At least that isn't happening to me. I better shut my mouth and go along and just keep my head down and just do what I'm doing. Don't think about things too much. Don't question things too much. Be glad with what you have, that it's as good as it is, because look at what's out there. Keep people in fear. Make them think it's great that I even have what I have now, because they'll never really think about how they're spiritually impoverished, morally impoverished, psychologically, mentally, and emotionally impoverished. You keep pumping the modality of fear into them. And if that isn't working even as good as you like, you have distraction, you have sports, you have celebrity celebrity worship and celebrity gossip. This isn't even news. This is pure distraction. This is dissuasion to get people to look the other way. Get them to pay attention to something that's really utterly meaningless, so they're not really seeing what's happening to them. And being people like this in the media, on these conservative talk shows, on these they're really just pumping out a worldview that the state wants people to think. And essentially, all these talking heads really are parrots. They are parroting an official version, an official worldview, an official storyline, the movie, as the researcher David Icke calls it, to get people to see this version and this vision of the world, but never really think about it in their own terms and with their own mind. Just accept what we've told you. We're the repeaters. We got it from our higher-ups, and we're just reading it. We have news readers, yellow journalists, news readers for the state in this country. We don't have a free press. We have a tightly controlled press that are news readers. They're parrots for the official state propaganda. Unfortunately, that's what we have in the mainstream media. This is changing through the alternative media, however, which I'll talk about in part 3. Adolf Hitler understood how important the control of the media was. He said, through clever and constant application of propaganda, people can be made to see paradise as hell, and also the other way around, to consider the most wretched sort of life as paradise. Because that's what the media is there for, to keep people asleep and to keep people afraid, in fear consciousness, so that we are a sheep looking up to Big Daddy for protection. That's what it is designed, scientifically designed to do to the consciousness. Food and medicine is a very important method of manipulation. They're in quotes here because they're anything but foods or medicines. They're actually poisons. We're being poisoned at the level of what we take into our body through our foods. Foods are sprayed with pesticides. There are chemical fertilizers in the soils that they're grown. They're genetically modified foods that are causing all kinds of health problems and not giving us the nutrients that we need in our diet. The fast food and sugar and carb-based diet that we see in fast food chains throughout the United States, and through the chemical processed foods that are being pumped into our supermarkets. Factory farming systems, too, in which animals go through absolutely incredible amounts of suffering and are treated in horrifically inhumane ways, and then we're consuming that energy. So many different aspects of food. What's coming up with Codex Alimentarius to make nutritional supplements, drugs, and then more tightly control them. Could do a whole presentation in and of itself in what is going on in our food. But the flip side of all the negative things that are taking place with what is being pumped into us through the Western diet is the unnecessary application of medications and surgery. The Western medical view of the world, that the body is simply a machine, is a horribly left-brained approach to holistic wellness, to health. And they want us to see ourselves as needing their solutions for well-being, like drugs, like pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals aren't what create health. Health is created on a number of different levels through how we think, what we put into our body, what we pay attention to, how we react to stressful situations. It is not created by pharmaceuticals. These are treatment of the symptoms, not addressing the root causes of dis-ease. So the medical community simply wants to keep this going by selling us unnecessary drugs and surgery because that is their product. They are in operation as long as they are selling us drugs and surgery. Most individuals in these jobs don't really, down deep, want to create wellness. They want people, at the highest levels, they want people sick. It's knowingly put into effect. They want people sick because that's how they stay in business, by having sick people. They gauge their success by how many people are ill and that we're treating. That's not a measure of success. Measure of success in any kind of true medicinal field would be how many people are well and don't need to be treated because they're in good health. So HMOs propagate this because they're just about profits, and they're not really out there to help people. They're out there to make as much profit as possible. They're answerable to their shareholders for profit above all else. The medical community goes along with this because they want to stay in operation and have an ever-flowing clientele and sell people unnecessary drugs and surgery. Vaccinations are a part of this, often a deadly cocktail of chemicals. Who knows what are in some of them? Not as much research as needs to be done has been done on a lot of these vaccinations, and you're seeing all kinds of unforeseen side effects through the vaccination of our children. And then this brings me to the often what can be the most harmful substances that one can put into their body, the antidepressant series of drugs, SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These lock serotonin in the neural pathways between synaptic clefts, and oftentimes, because this serotonin cannot be reuptaken into the brain chemistry, it will start to bond in place in between the neurotransmitter will bond in place in the synapses, and this can cut people off from certain emotions and certain levels of consciousness and certain ways of opening up their mind, expanding their consciousness, and seeing things in a new light. This is a scientifically engineered way of keeping people at a very specific level of consciousness and a very specific level of feeling the emotions that they're experiencing, and often not feeling them at all. Some people report that these substances make you incapable of feeling certain types of emotions, and that's why I would say they're extraordinarily dangerous to be messing with, because and they're absolutely overprescribed as well. But they're dangerous to be taking and messing with, because anything that really permanently affects serotonin levels I would view as a dangerous compound to put into the body. We are meant to feel certain emotions because our emotions are our compass for our moral direction in life. You start to play the numbing out of emotions game, and you're heading on a very slippery path into robot consciousness, let's put it that way. So that's my take on SSRIs. I call them the demon drugs, a class of demonic compounds. Very much against their use and overprescription. The illusion of time is the next method of manipulation that the sorcerers of consciousness use against us. This is kind of a conceptual one. It's a heady one. You have to visualize this aspect. So time is a quality that we often see in physical terms. We say, I don't have enough time. I am spending time. Time flies. See, it's looking at time as a physical quantity based on physical movements of astronomical bodies. So you're quantifying time, and you're saying that it's a physical thing. This goes hand in hand with the idea that time is money. Time is value to us, and we have to acquire it, or we have to look at it in a way that is physical in nature. So this keeps the consciousness very much grounded in the physical world. It's based on physical astronomical objects. It is based on physically, endlessly repeating cycles that go over and over and over again and repeat endlessly. So it's a negative worldview way to conceptualize the notion of time. This is a great depiction of what I look at as present moment awareness, or the idea that time is actually an illusion. Because if you can get somebody time identified, they'll not take the time to look into certain events. They're wound up in the events that go on in their life, and it's an endlessly repeating cycle of events over and over and over again. Nobody dissuading from going off of the usual path of what they do on a daily basis, and they're locked in an endlessly repeating cycle. This is a depiction of the Gnostic crucifixion, where it's a symbol. This is a symbol about time, in effect. If you look at Jesus as the Savior, the light of the world, the one who is the Redeemer of consciousness, okay? Not saying that I necessarily believe in the man Jesus in that realm. We're looking at this as a symbol. He is crucified at Golgotha, a Greek word which means the place of the skull. So the light of the world, the awakened consciousness, the Savior of the world, our consciousness that is born in the prefrontal neocortex of the brain, that the third eye, so to speak, the light, right, is crucified. He's put to death at the place of the skull. This means that the light of the world can be put to death in the mind through psychologically being identified with time. So psychological time is represented by the two thieves that the light of the world is crucified among. This is the thief of the past. He robs from the present moment awareness. What is happening now? What we're experiencing now at this moment. The present moment. The gift moment. This thief is the future. He also robs from the present moment. So if you can keep people's consciousness identified with time, they are always either in regret over the past or in anxiety over the future. They're never really rooted or grounded in the present moment, the gift of consciousness, the light of the world, understanding what's going on within you now and around you at any given time. True present moment awareness. We'll talk about that more in part 3. The last method of manipulation before I get to the big 3 is the denial, hassle, and ridicule factor. So this is threefold. The first one is denial. Again, the ostrich with his head in the sand. Don't look at these things. They're all negative. Why would you bother spending your time analyzing the negativity that's going on? Well, because if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to make an accurate diagnosis. You need to look at the negative so you can make a diagnosis. Dia in Latin means, or in Greek means through, and gnosis means knowledge. A diagnosis happens through knowledge. And if it means looking at the negative, what's the underlying cause of the symptom you're experiencing, you need to do it. You cannot continue to exist in denial that these things are taking place. This is a serious psychological condition known as cognitive dissonance. It's simply seeing with your own eyes the negativity that's going on in the world and yet still saying it isn't that way. No, I deny that it is that way. It isn't how I see it happening before my own eyes, but I still choose to believe that it isn't so. That's cognitive dissonance. That's serious. It's a serious psychological condition of denial. Hassle is the second factor of the DHR factor, denial, hassle, ridicule. I don't want to start speaking out against this stuff because I'm afraid of all the hassle that I'll have to go through by people who don't want to hear this message. It may even be the truth, but I'm not going to bother speaking it because I'll have to go through too much hassle and endure too many unpleasantries. Well, that also won't get you any change. That will also keep you controlled. It will keep you actually enslaved. You will not really make any changes for the better in your life and actually work toward true freedom and true peace, prosperity, or order if you stay in the modality of the hassle-free zone. And the third, of course, is ridicule. I don't want to talk about these things because not many people know about them or understand them, so I'll be seen as the guy in the tinfoil hat, the weird guy who, talks about strange things that people can't really understand or comprehend and don't know about or want to know about, so I'll just shut my mouth and not say anything. And this is another way that we police ourselves. These methods are how the sheep become the sheepdog and police themselves. Denial, hassle, ridicule. We fall prey to these. We're not really working toward true change. We're not really working toward true freedom.